I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway on that sweltering Tuesday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona, and saw my white picket fence gleaming an aggressive shade of beige. My name is Kevin Patterson, and I have lived in the Sunnyside Meadows subdivision for 3 years. The house is a modest 2-story with a decent yard, and until that particular day in July, I thought I had managed to stay under the radar of our neighborhood's most notorious busybody, Brenda Morrison. Brenda held the title of Vice President of the Homeowners Association, though she acted more like a dictator than anything else. She was in her mid-50s, always dressed in tennis whites despite never playing tennis, and had that particular haircut that seemed to defy both gravity and common sense. I sat in my truck for a full minute, staring at the fence that separated my property from hers. It was definitely my fence. I had built it myself 2 years ago, carefully measuring to ensure it was 6 inches inside my property line to avoid any disputes. The white paint had been my choice, a classic color that matched my house trim perfectly. Now it looked like someone had slathered it with the color of old oatmeal. Getting out of the truck, I walked over to inspect the damage. The paint was fresh, still tacky in some spots where the Arizona sun had not yet baked it completely dry. I touched it with my finger and felt the slight give of recent application. My blood started to simmer as I noticed that only the side facing Brenda's house had been painted. My side remained white. I marched straight to her front door and rang the bell 3 times in quick succession. Through the frosted glass, I could see her figure approaching, moving with that particular gait of someone who thinks they own the world. "Kevin," she said when she opened the door, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What can I do for you? You painted my fence," I said, keeping my voice level despite wanting to shout. "Without my permission." "Oh, that," she waved her hand dismissively. "I was simply bringing your property into compliance with HOA standards. Your white fence was creating a glare into my windows. The approved color palette includes desert beige, which is what I used. Brenda, that is my fence on my property. You had no right to touch it." She pulled out a piece of paper from seemingly nowhere, like she had been waiting for this confrontation. According to Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws, any structure visible from neighboring properties must conform to the approved color scheme. Your white fence was in violation. I built that fence 3 years ago. No one said anything then. The rule was instituted last month at the HOA meeting. You would know that if you attended. Her smile was pure smugness. You cannot just paint someone else's property without permission. That is vandalism. It is HOA enforcement. If you have a complaint, you can bring it up at the next meeting. Have a good day, Kevin. She shut the door in my face. I stood there on her porch, trembling with anger. 3 years I had managed to avoid direct conflict with this woman, and now she had literally defaced my property. Walking back to my house, I examined the fence more carefully. She had done a thorough job, I had to admit. Every slat on her side was covered in that hideous beige. The contrast between the 2 sides was stark and jarring. Inside my house, I pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws. I had received them when I purchased the property, but had only skimmed them at the time. Now, I read Section 7 carefully. The color palette was indeed listed, and desert beige was on it, but so was bright white. My original color was completely compliant. More importantly, there was no provision that gave the HOA the right to paint someone's property without permission. Any violations were supposed to result in a written notice, followed by a fine if not corrected within 30 days, and only then could the HOA take action after a formal hearing. Brenda had skipped every single step in the process. I called my buddy Marcus, who worked as a paralegal downtown. After explaining the situation, he let out a low whistle. Man, that is straight-up property damage. You could file a police report. Would they actually do anything? Probably not much. It is a civil matter mostly, but it creates a paper trail. You should also document everything. Take photos, write down the timeline, keep all communications. I want to paint it back. You have every right to. It is your fence. No, I mean I want to paint it back in a way that really makes a point. Marcus laughed. What are you thinking? She said the white created a glare into her windows. I am thinking about showing her what a real glare looks like. Be careful, man. Do not give her ammunition to come after you. After hanging up, I spent the rest of the evening documenting everything. I took photos from every angle, measured the fence again to confirm it was entirely on my property, and wrote out a detailed timeline. Then I started researching paint colors. The next morning, I filed a police report for vandalism. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic, but confirmed what Marcus had said. It was primarily a civil matter. However, he did provide me with a case number and said the report would be on file if I needed it for court. Then I went to the hardware store. I spent a good hour in the paint section, holding up different swatches and imagining Brenda's reaction. I needed something that was on the HOA approved list, so she could not claim I was in violation. But I also wanted something that would make my point crystal clear. That is when I found it, solar yellow. It was technically called Sunshine Burst and was absolutely, blindingly bright. According to the color description, it was meant to evoke the joy and energy of a perfect summer day. According to my imagination, it would reflect light into Brenda's windows like a searchlight. I checked my copy of the HOA color palette 3 times. Solar yellow was right there in the accent colors section, perfectly compliant. I bought 4 gallons, along with primer, brushes, rollers, and all the supplies I would need. The kid at the checkout counter looked at the color and winced. That is going to be really bright, he said. That is the idea. Back home, I started prep work immediately. I wanted to get this done fast, before Brenda could try anything else. I used paint stripper on her beige coat, which was easier than I expected since it had only been on for a day. The white underneath was mostly intact. While I worked, I saw Brenda's curtains twitching. She was watching me. Good. Let her wonder what I was planning. It took me 2 full days to complete the job. First, I primed the entire fence both sides. Then I applied 2 coats of that glorious, obnoxious solar yellow, only on the side facing her house. My side facing my property, I repainted a nice, clean white. The effect was even better than I had hoped. The yellow was so bright it almost hurt to look at directly. In the Arizona sun, it practically glowed. I stood back and admired my work, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. I did not have to wait long for Brenda's reaction. Within an hour of finishing the final coat, my doorbell was ringing like someone was trying to break it. "What have you done?" Brenda shrieked when I opened the door. Her face was red and a vein was pulsing in her forehead. "That color is hideous." "It is on the approved list," I said calmly. Solar yellow, right there in the accent colors section. Accent colors are meant for shutters and trim, not entire structures. The bylaws do not specify that. They just say approved colors. Solar yellow is approved. It is reflecting into my windows. I cannot even watch television in my living room without sunglasses. Funny, that is exactly what you said about my white fence. At least now your complaint is valid. I am writing you up for this violation. It is not a violation. But what you did, painting my fence without permission, that is vandalism. I have filed a police report. Her eyes went wide. You did what? I filed a police report for property damage. I also documented everything. If you want to take this to the HOA board, go ahead. But I am prepared to file a civil suit for the cost of repainting my fence, plus damages. This is not over, she hissed. Not by a long shot. She stomped back to her house, and I watched her go with a grim smile. I knew this was just the beginning. Over the next week, I received 3 written notices from the HOA. The first claimed my fence color was inappropriate and garish. The second claimed it was a nuisance to neighboring properties. The third demanded I repaint it within 7 days or face a fine of $100 per day. I responded to each notice with a detailed letter. I cited the exact section of the bylaws that listed solar yellow as an approved color. I pointed out that Brenda had violated my property rights by painting my fence without permission or following proper procedures. I included copies of my police report and photos documenting her vandalism. I also requested a formal hearing before the HOA board, as was my right under the bylaws. The hearing was scheduled for the last Thursday of July, to be held at the community center. I spent the intervening time preparing my case like I was going to trial. I made printed copies of all my documentation, prepared a timeline of events, and even created a presentation on my laptop. Marcus agreed to come with me as moral support. "This is going to be interesting," he said as we walked into the community center that evening. The meeting room was already packed. Apparently, word had spread about the fence dispute, and half the neighborhood had shown up to watch. I recognized several faces, including my next-door neighbor Tom, who gave me a supportive thumbs up. The HOA board consisted of 5 people. President Gary Richardson sat in the middle, a retired accountant who always looked vaguely uncomfortable. Brenda sat to his right, practically vibrating with self-righteous anger. The other 3 board members were Sharon Lee, Robert Franco, and Janet Kowalski. I had interacted with them at neighborhood events, but did not know them well. "This hearing is to address the complaint filed against Kevin Patterson regarding his fence color," Gary began, reading from a prepared statement. "Brenda, as the complainant, please present your case." Brenda stood up, smoothing her tennis whites. She had prepared a presentation too, complete with printed photos of my yellow fence. "As you can see from these images, Mr. Patterson has painted his fence an extremely bright, garish yellow that is creating a significant nuisance. The color is reflective and causes a glare that makes it difficult to use rooms in my home during daylight hours. This is affecting my quality of life and my property value." She went on for 10 minutes, describing in detail how the yellow fence was ruining her life. According to her, she could not sleep because the yellow gave her headaches. She could not use her living room. Her guests were complaining. It was practically a crime against humanity. "Furthermore," she continued, "while solar yellow is technically on the approved list, it is clearly meant for small accent areas, not large structures. Mr. Patterson is violating the spirit of the HOA guidelines, if not the letter." When she finally sat down, Gary turned to me. "Mr. Patterson, your response?" I stood up and connected my laptop to the projector. "Thank you. I would like to start by providing some context that Brenda conveniently left out." I pulled up my first slide, showing photos of my fence as it was originally, white, clean, and classic. "This is my fence 3 weeks ago. I built it 2 years ago entirely on my property, 6 inches inside my property line. The color was bright white, which is also on the approved color list. I received no complaints about this color for 2 years. Next slide. Photos of the beige paint job. On July 15th, I came home to find that someone had painted my fence without my permission. That someone was Brenda Morrison. She applied desert beige paint to the side of my fence facing her property, claiming it was HOA enforcement. I looked directly at Brenda. This was not HOA enforcement. This was vandalism. Brenda did not follow any of the proper procedures outlined in our bylaws. There was no written notice, no opportunity for me to respond, no hearing, nothing. She simply took it upon herself to paint my property. I clicked to the next slide, showing the relevant sections of the bylaws. According to Section 9, Paragraph 5, any enforcement action must begin with written notice. If the violation is not corrected within 30 days, a fine may be imposed. Only after all other remedies are exhausted can the HOA take physical action to correct a violation, and even then, it requires a board vote. Sharon Lee, one of the board members, leaned forward. "Brenda, did you follow these procedures?" Brenda's face was getting red again. The white fence was creating a glare. I was within my rights to address the issue. "That is not an answer," Sharon said. "Did you issue a written notice?" "No, but did you bring the issue to the board for a vote? It was a clear violation." "I did not think." "So you took it upon yourself to paint someone else's property without following procedures or getting authorization from this board?" Brenda looked around the table, clearly expecting support. She found none. Even Gary was frowning. "The white fence was not a violation," I continued. "Bright white is an approved color, but even if it were a violation, Brenda had no right to touch my property. I filed a police report for vandalism. I also have documentation from my property survey showing that the fence is entirely on my land." I clicked through several more slides, showing my survey, the police report, and photos documenting the timeline. After discovering the vandalism, I repainted my fence. I chose solar yellow from the approved accent colors list. Yes, it is bright. That was intentional. Brenda claimed my white fence created a glare into her windows, so I decided to show her what a real glare looks like. There were a few chuckles from the audience. Gary banged his gavel. "Order, please." "I understand the color is unusual," I said, "but it is approved. It is on my property. And I have every right to paint my fence any approved color I choose. If Brenda does not like it, maybe she should not have vandalized my property in the first place." I sat down. Gary called for a brief recess while the board deliberated. Marcus leaned over and whispered, "That was good, man. You have got them." After 15 minutes, the board reconvened. Gary looked uncomfortable as he read their decision. "After reviewing the evidence and the bylaws, the board has reached the following conclusions. First, solar yellow is indeed an approved color. While unusual for a fence, there is no restriction on using accent colors for larger structures. Second, Brenda Morrison did not follow proper procedures when she painted Mr. Patterson's fence. This action is not supported or authorized by this board. Third, the complaint against Mr. Patterson is dismissed. He is not required to repaint his fence." Relief washed over me. Then Gary continued, "However, we encourage Mr. Patterson to consider choosing a less bold color in the future, in the interest of neighborhood harmony. We will also be reviewing our color palette guidelines to provide more specific direction on appropriate uses." "Excuse me," Sharon Lee interrupted. "I have something to add. Brenda, your actions were completely out of line. You do not have the authority to paint someone's property, regardless of your position on this board. If I were Mr. Patterson, I would be pursuing legal action against you personally." Brenda's face went through several shades of red and purple. "This is outrageous." "I was acting in the best interests of the community." "You were acting on your own personal preferences," Robert Franco chimed in. "There is a difference. We have rules and procedures for a reason." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Brenda stormed out, shouting about how the board was undermining her authority. Several neighbors came up to congratulate me. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "That was amazing, man. Brenda has needed to be taken down a peg for years." Driving home with Marcus, I felt vindicated but also wary. I knew Brenda well enough to know she would not let this go. She was the type to hold a grudge until the end of time. I was right to be cautious. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed several suspicious things. My mailbox was knocked over twice. Someone let the air out of my truck tires 3 times. My garbage cans kept ending up in the street even though I knew I had left them by my garage. I could not prove it was Brenda, but I had my suspicions. I installed a security camera system, placing cameras at my front door, driveway, and pointing at the fence line. The system recorded continuously and stored footage in the cloud. The cameras paid off faster than I expected. On a Wednesday evening around 9 at night, I got a motion alert on my phone. I pulled up the live feed and saw Brenda in my yard, spray painting something on my fence. I grabbed my phone and ran outside. "Brenda, what are you doing?" She spun around, spray can still in hand. In the glow of my porch light, I could see she had spray painted "trashy" in large black letters across the yellow fence. "You have ruined this neighborhood," she screamed. "Someone has to make you see reason. You are spray painting my fence. I have you on camera." She looked up and saw the security camera pointing right at her. For a moment, she seemed to realize the gravity of what she had done. Then her face hardened. "You started this with that awful yellow. Get off my property, now, or I am calling the police." "Fine, but this is not over." She threw the spray can at my fence, leaving another mark, and stormed off. I called the police immediately. This time, with video evidence, they took it more seriously. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. I showed them the footage on my laptop, which clearly showed Brenda walking onto my property and spray painting my fence. "We will go talk to her," one officer said. "Do you want to press charges?" I thought about it. Part of me just wanted this to be over. But Brenda had now vandalized my fence twice, and I had a feeling she would keep escalating if there were no consequences. "Yes, I want to press charges." The officers went next door. Through my window, I could see lights turning on in Brenda's house. They were there for about 30 minutes. When they came back, one officer handed me a case number. "We have cited her for criminal mischief. She will have to appear in court. We also served her with a warning to stay off your property. If she contacts you or comes onto your property again, call us immediately." After they left, I looked at the damage. The black spray paint was harsh against the yellow, but at least she had only gotten one side of one section before I interrupted her. I would need to repaint that section, but it could wait until after the legal issues were resolved. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. I kept expecting another incident, but nothing happened. Brenda's house seemed dark most of the time, her car missing from the driveway. Then I received an email from Gary Richardson, the HOA president. He wanted to meet with me in person, at a neutral location. We agreed on a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix the following Saturday morning. Gary was already there when I arrived, nursing a large coffee and looking stressed. He had aged 10 years since the hearing. "Kevin, thanks for meeting me," he said as I sat down. "I wanted to talk to you off the record." "Okay. This situation with Brenda has gotten completely out of hand. The board held an emergency meeting yesterday. We voted to remove her from her position as vice president, effective immediately." I raised my eyebrows. "Really? Her actions were indefensible. She vandalized your property twice, she failed to follow proper procedures, and she has brought legal trouble onto the HOA. We also reviewed other complaints about her behavior over the past year. There is a pattern of her overstepping her authority and harassing homeowners over minor issues. I am glad the board is taking this seriously. There is more. Several other homeowners have come forward since the hearing with their own stories about Brenda. She has been issuing unauthorized fines, threatening people, and generally acting like she owns the neighborhood. We are looking into whether she has misappropriated any HOA funds. That was news to me. Misappropriated funds? We are not sure yet, but there are some discrepancies in the accounts that Brenda was managing. We have hired a forensic accountant to audit our finances. If there is any wrongdoing, we will be contacting the authorities. Gary looked miserable. I am so sorry this happened, Kevin. If I had been paying more attention, I could have stopped Brenda before it got to this point. She was always so insistent and seemed so confident in her authority that I just trusted her to handle things. It is not your fault that she went rogue. Still, as president, the responsibility falls on me. I wanted you to know that the board fully supports you. If you need anything from us for your court case against Brenda, we will provide it. We talked for a while longer. Gary explained that the board was implementing new oversight procedures to prevent any single member from acting unilaterally. They were also reviewing all of Brenda's previous enforcement actions to make sure they were legitimate. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sympathy. Satisfaction that Brenda was finally facing consequences for her actions, but also a twinge of sympathy for Gary and the other board members who were left to clean up the mess. The criminal case moved forward. Brenda pleaded not guilty initially, but her lawyer must have explained the reality of the situation. There was clear video evidence of her vandalizing my property, and she had been caught in the act. 2 weeks before trial, she changed her plea to no contest. The judge sentenced her to 200 hours of community service, 3 years of probation, and ordered her to pay restitution for the damage to my fence plus court costs. It was not a harsh sentence, but it was public and embarrassing. The local news even ran a small story about the HOA vice president caught on camera vandalizing a neighbor's fence. Meanwhile, the HOA's forensic accounting discovered that Brenda had been pocketing fines she collected from homeowners. Over the course of 3 years, she had embezzled nearly $15,000. This led to criminal charges for theft and fraud. I was not directly involved in that case, but I followed it in the news. Brenda tried to claim the money was for HOA expenses that she had paid out of pocket, but she could not provide receipts or documentation. The evidence was overwhelming. She eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison, followed by 5 years of probation, and ordered her to pay back the full amount plus penalties. She would also have to perform an additional 500 hours of community service after her release. It was a stunning fall from grace. Brenda had gone from being the vice president of the HOA to a convicted felon in less than 4 months, all because she could not stand the sight of my white fence. As for my fence, I left it solar yellow for exactly 3 months. It was a point of pride, a symbol of standing up to bullies and unreasonable authority. Neighbors would drive by slowly to look at it. Some gave me thumbs up. A few asked if I would consider painting their fences yellow too as a show of solidarity, but eventually the satisfaction wore off. The yellow was really bright. Even I had to admit it was a bit much. One Saturday in early November, when the Arizona heat had finally broken, I repainted it. I chose a nice sage green this time, another color from the approved list. It was subtle, calming, and complemented my house nicely. It also did not create any glare into anyone's windows. Tom came over with a beer while I was finishing up the last section. End of an era, he said, handing me the beer. Yeah, I guess so. You know, you have kind of become a legend in the neighborhood, the guy who stood up to HOA Karen. I laughed. I did not set out to be a legend, I just wanted my white fence back. Sometimes that is how it happens. You drew a line and you did not let her cross it. A lot of people respected that. We stood there in comfortable silence, drinking our beers and looking at the freshly painted green fence. It looked good. It looked like it belonged. "How is Brenda doing?" I asked, even though I was not sure I cared. Last I heard, she moved in with her sister in Tucson. Could not handle the shame of staying here. Her house is up for sale. That is rough. She did it to herself, man. All she had to do was leave your fence alone. That was true. If Brenda had just followed proper procedures, sent me a notice, let me respond, none of this would have happened. I probably would have agreed to paint the fence a different color if she had asked nicely. But she had to take control, had to assert her authority, and it had cost her everything. The new HOA board was much more reasonable. They sent out a newsletter apologizing for the previous administration's overreach and promising a more collaborative approach. They also revised the bylaws to make enforcement procedures clearer and to require board approval for any significant actions. Gary Richardson announced he would not seek re-election as president. He had learned his lesson about the importance of oversight and did not want the stress anymore. Sharon Lee ran for president and won easily. Under her leadership, the HOA became what it was supposed to be, a body that maintained common areas and handled neighborhood concerns, not a bunch of petty tyrants looking for violations. Life settled back into a comfortable rhythm. I went to work, came home, maintained my yard and house. I started dating someone I met at the gym, a woman named Lisa who thought the whole fence saga was hilarious. She liked that I had stood my ground. "Too many people just roll over when someone pushes them," she said one evening while we were grilling in my backyard. "You actually did something about it. I just painted a fence yellow. You documented everything, went through proper channels, and when that did not work, you fought back in a creative, legal way. That takes guts." I looked at the green fence, barely visible in the fading twilight. It had been quite a journey from white to beige to yellow to green. But more than that, it had been a journey in understanding boundaries, both literal and figurative. Brenda had crossed a boundary when she painted my fence. She had assumed she had the right to control my property because of her position. When I pushed back, she doubled down, unable to accept that she might be wrong. That rigidity, that need for control, had ultimately destroyed her life in the neighborhood she claimed to be protecting. I had learned something too. I had learned that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even over something as seemingly trivial as a fence color, because it was never really about the fence. It was about respect, boundaries, and the right to control your own property. The court case for my civil suit against Brenda was straightforward. With her criminal conviction and all my documentation, my lawyer said it was an easy win. Brenda's lawyer approached us with a settlement offer before we even got to trial. She would pay for all my repainting costs, the security camera system I had installed, and additional damages for the harassment and stress. The amount was not huge, around $5,000, but it was enough. More importantly, it was closure. I accepted the settlement, and that chapter of my life officially closed. Months passed. Winter in Phoenix is beautiful, with clear blue skies and temperatures that make you remember why people live in the desert. I was sitting on my back porch one Sunday morning, drinking coffee and reading the news on my tablet when my phone rang. It was Gary Richardson, which surprised me. We had not spoken since that meeting at the coffee shop. "Kevin, I hope I am not bothering you," he said. "Not at all. What is up?" I wanted to give you some news. Brenda was released early from prison for good behavior. She served about 8 months, but that is not why I am calling. She has sent a letter to the HOA and to several homeowners, including yourself. I thought you should know before it arrives. My stomach tightened. What kind of letter? An apology. A real one, from what I can tell. No excuses, no justifications. She takes full responsibility for her actions and apologizes for the damage she caused. She is also including checks for additional restitution beyond what the court ordered. I did not know what to say. An apology was the last thing I expected. How do you know it is genuine? I do not, for certain. But she is in therapy, apparently. Part of her probation requires it. And her sister contacted me separately to say that Brenda has been working hard to understand why she acted the way she did. Whether that is real change or just talk, time will tell. The letter arrived 2 days later. It was handwritten, 3 pages long, and as Gary had said, it offered no excuses. Dear Kevin, it began. I do not expect you to forgive me, and I do not deserve your forgiveness. What I did to you was wrong on every level. I violated your property, your rights, and your peace of mind. I let my need for control override basic decency and respect. I am deeply sorry. She went on to explain that her time in prison and her therapy had helped her realize that she had been using the HOA as a way to feel powerful and important. She had been going through a difficult divorce during the time of the incidents, though she stressed that was not an excuse, just context. She had taken out her anger and frustration on the neighborhood, and particularly on me when I challenged her. I see now that you were not my enemy, she wrote. You were simply a homeowner trying to enjoy your property in peace. The fact that I could not handle you asserting your rights shows how far I had fallen into toxic thinking. I am working every day to be better, to understand healthy boundaries, and to treat people with the respect they deserve. The letter ended with another apology and a check for $2,000 made out to me personally. I know money cannot undo the stress I caused you, but I hope this helps in some small way. I sat with that letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to refuse any olive branch from the woman who had made my life hell for months. But another part of me recognized that holding on to anger would only hurt me, not her. Lisa found me still sitting there an hour later, staring at the letter. "What is that?" she asked. I handed it to her. She read it carefully, her expression neutral. "What are you going to do?" she asked when she finished. I do not know. Part of me thinks it is manipulative, like she is trying to make herself feel better, but part of me thinks maybe people can change. They can. But they do not always. You do not owe her anything, Kevin, not forgiveness, not a response, nothing. I know. We sat together in silence for a while. Finally, I made a decision. I wrote back. It was a short letter, just a few paragraphs. I acknowledged receiving her apology and told her I appreciated it. I said I hoped she was genuine in her efforts to change and that I hoped she found peace. I did not say I forgave her, because I was not sure I did. But I did not say I did not forgive her either. I left it open, honest. I cashed the check. It felt weird, but I had earned that money through the stress and hassle she had caused. I donated half of it to a local charity that helped crime victims. The other half I used to take Lisa on a nice weekend trip to Sedona. Spring came to Phoenix, bringing with it wildflowers and the promise of the brutal summer heat to come. The neighborhood was thriving under Sharon's leadership. The common areas looked better than they had in years. People were actually showing up to HOA meetings because they were productive instead of combative. I ran into Tom at the community pool one Saturday. "Hey, did you hear?" he said, excitement in his voice. "They are talking about painting the community center. Sharon wants to do a poll of residents to pick the color." That is a good idea, democratic. Yeah, someone suggested solar yellow. He grinned at me, very funny. I am serious, as like a joke or homage or something. Obviously, it did not win the poll, but the fact that someone suggested it shows how much things have changed. He was right. A year ago, suggesting solar yellow would have gotten you written up by Brenda. Now it was a neighborhood in joke, a reference to the time someone stood up to petty tyranny and won. My green fence aged nicely through the spring and summer. It required minimal maintenance, just occasional cleaning. The sage color was perfect, exactly what I had wanted all along, if I had just been given the chance to choose it on my own terms. That was the key lesson in all of this. People generally want to be reasonable. They will work with their neighbors, follow rules, maintain their properties. But when you try to force them, when you disrespect their autonomy and their rights, that is when problems arise. Brenda had learned that lesson the hard way. I hope she truly had changed, that her apology was genuine. But whether she had or not, I had moved on. I had my green fence, my peaceful home, and a neighborhood that finally understood the difference between reasonable governance and authoritarian control. One evening in late June, almost exactly a year after the first incident, I was watering my front yard when a moving truck pulled up to Brenda's old house. A young couple got out, looking excited and a little overwhelmed. They had a toddler who immediately ran around the front yard, giggling with pure joy. I walked over to introduce myself. "Hi, I am Kevin. I live next door." "Oh, hi," the woman said brightly. "I am Jennifer. This is my husband David, and that little tornado is Madison. Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thanks, we are so excited. This is our first house." "That is great. If you need anything, just let me know." David looked at my fence. "I love that green color, very calming." "Thanks. It took me a while to settle on it." "The HOA here is pretty strict, right?" The realtor mentioned something about that. I smiled. "It used to be, but things have changed. The current board is much more reasonable. As long as you maintain your property and are respectful of your neighbors, you will be fine." "Good to know," Jennifer said. We were a little worried about that. As I walked back to my house, I felt a sense of completion. New neighbors, a fresh start, a return to normalcy. The fence saga had become neighborhood history, a story that would probably be told at barbecues and block parties for years to come. But for me, it was over. The fence was green, the cameras still recorded everything for security, and I had learned valuable lessons about standing up for myself while also knowing when to let go. That night, I stood in my backyard as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The temperature was starting to drop from the day's heat. In the distance, I could hear children playing, dogs barking, the ordinary sounds of a neighborhood at peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Dinner at my place tomorrow. I am making lasagna." I smiled and texted back. "Sounds perfect." Life was good. The fence was just a fence again, a simple boundary marker between properties. Not a battlefield, not a statement, just a fence. And that was exactly how it should be. As I headed inside, I took one last look at that green fence. It had been white, then beige, then yellow, and finally green. Each color had meant something different, represented a different phase of the conflict and resolution. But now it was settled, stable, exactly what I wanted. Sometimes you have to paint something bright yellow to make people understand boundaries. Sometimes you have to stand your ground even when it seems easier to just give in. And sometimes, when it is all over, you paint it green and move on with your life. The HOA saga had taught me all of that and more. It had taught me about the importance of documentation, about knowing your rights, about creative problem solving, and about the value of a good lawyer and supportive friends. It had also taught me that bullies often crumble when you stand up to them, especially when they have built their power on a foundation of intimidation rather than legitimate authority. But most importantly, it taught me that home is worth fighting for. Not just the physical structure, but the peace, the autonomy, the right to live your life without someone else dictating every detail. That is what I had fought for, and that is what I had won. The green fence stood as a quiet testament to all of it. Not as bright and defiant as the yellow, but strong and lasting. A reminder that sometimes the best victories are the ones where you can finally just be at peace. And I was at peace. Finally, completely, genuinely at peace. The war was over, and I could simply enjoy my home, my fence, and my life. That was the real victory, more valuable than any court judgment or forced apology. The victory of being able to sit on my porch, look at my green fence, and smile.